There are nights when the air itself feels like it's waiting for something to happen, like the walls are holding their breath, and the light from the chandeliers trembles because it knows a secret you don't. And that's exactly how it felt the first time she walked into the restaurant. The girl everyone whispered about, but no one dared to look at directly. The one whose silence carried the weight of a dozen unsaid warnings. I was wiping down a table near the window, pretending not to notice the men in suits who never ordered but always sat near the back, pretending not to feel their eyes crawl over the room like shadows that didn't belong to anyone. It was one of those evenings where you could hear the clock ticking louder than the laughter, and then the door opened, and every sound stopped. She stepped in with that slow, cautious movement of someone who's used to being watched, her hands gripping the strap of her bag like it was a shield, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her face. Her eyes, wide, searching, too alert, flicked across the tables, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of uncertainty there, the kind that made my chest tighten because I knew it too well. Then I realized who she was. Everyone in this part of the city knew the stories. Alessio Moretti's daughter, the one born deaf, the one no one dared speak to because she belonged to a man whose temper could level an empire. Some said he kept her hidden like a secret. Others that she was his only weakness, a liability he would kill to protect. Whatever the truth was, the moment she walked in, no one moved. The servers froze. The bartender looked away. And the men at the back, his men, straightened in their seats like the air itself had given an order. She reached the counter, set her small notebook down, and began writing something. The bartender looked confused, then uncomfortable. "Miss, I don't..." He gestured helplessly, and that was when I saw it. The tiny tremor in her hands, the way she swallowed hard before trying again, flipping to another page, desperate for someone to understand her. And no one did. Before I could stop myself, I crossed the room. My heart hammered in my chest because I knew what it meant to draw attention in this place. But there was something unbearable about the way she stood there, isolated in a crowd that pretended she didn't exist. I touched her sleeve gently, and when she turned, I signed the simplest thing I could think of. "Can I help you?" Her eyes widened, shock first, then something softer, something dangerously close to hope. She signed back, hesitant. "You know how?" I nodded, and it was like the entire room exhaled in confusion. The bartender stepped back. The suited men glanced at each other, unsure whether to intervene. But I couldn't look away from her, couldn't stop my hands from moving as naturally as breathing. She told me she wanted tea, quiet, a place away from everyone's eyes. So I led her to a corner booth, the one near the piano, where the light fell gently, and the world felt smaller. For the next few minutes, it was just the two of us. Silence made visible through motion. Her name was Livia, and she spoke through her hands like music, each gesture carrying emotion so raw it made my throat ache. She told me she'd come here because her father used to bring her when she was little, that she wanted to remember what it felt like before everything turned to stone around her. I didn't ask what she meant. Some things you just don't ask. When I brought her tea, I noticed the reflection in the glass behind her. A figure at the far end of the room, tall, still, watching, the kind of stillness that doesn't belong to ordinary men. His face was unreadable, eyes like smoke caught in light. Even before my mind caught up, my body knew who it was. Alessio Moretti. The air grew heavier, as if his presence had weight. Every movement in the restaurant slowed to match his rhythm. He didn't look at anyone else, just me. Or maybe at Livia, or maybe at the invisible thread that had just connected us. I couldn't tell. But when his gaze locked with mine, I felt the kind of fear that's almost electric, the kind that burns but doesn't let you run. When I set the teapot down, Livia smiled, small, grateful, and signed, "Thank you." I smiled back. That was all it took. That tiny exchange, that fragile human moment. And then one of his men approached me, a shadow with a voice like gravel, and said, "The boss would like a word." My breath caught. The entire restaurant pretended not to notice. I turned, and there he was. Alessio himself, seated at the back in the booth everyone avoided, his hand resting on the table, a gold ring gleaming faintly under the low light. His expression was unreadable except for the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, not yet. More like a test. I walked toward him, the sound of my footsteps loud in the silence, each one feeling like a decision I couldn't undo. And when I stopped before him, he leaned back slightly and said in a voice smooth as smoke, "Tell me, ragazza, how does a waitress know the language of my daughter?" I didn't answer right away, because somehow I already knew. This conversation would change everything. It's strange how silence can feel louder than sound when the wrong man is looking at you. How a single heartbeat can drag into an eternity, stretching thin beneath the weight of a gaze that seems to read everything you've ever tried to hide. And sitting across from Alessio Moretti felt exactly like that, as if time had narrowed itself to this small table, this flickering light, this moment where I no longer remembered how to breathe. He didn't speak right away. He just watched me, his fingers tracing the rim of a glass filled with dark amber liquid. And in the pause between us, I could hear the whisper of movement from the far corners of the restaurant. His men pretending not to listen. My co-workers frozen mid-step, and Livia, his daughter, still seated in the booth, her eyes following every motion of his lips, though she couldn't hear the danger curled behind them. "I asked," he said at last, his voice quiet, rich and deliberate. "How does a waitress know the language of my daughter?" I swallowed hard, forcing the words through the dryness in my throat. My brother was deaf," I said, hating how my voice trembled. "We used to talk in sign. I never forgot." His eyes flickered, something unreadable passing through them. Not surprise, not sympathy, but a sort of measured curiosity, like he was fitting the pieces of me together in his head, trying to see if any part could be used against him. Then, without looking away, he raised his hand slightly, and one of his men stepped forward, placing a small porcelain cup before me, espresso, steaming and bitter. "Drink," Alessio said. It wasn't an offer. The scent of it filled my nose, strong, sharp, expensive, but I didn't touch it. "I should get back to work," I said softly, though my voice felt like an echo, fragile and far away. "You will," he murmured, "when I decide you will." His words didn't carry anger, only control, the kind of control that doesn't need to raise its voice because it knows you already understand. I forced myself to look at him then, at the perfectly cut suit, the black shirt open just enough to reveal a glimpse of gold chain at his throat, the lines around his mouth carved not from laughter but from power. He was beautiful in the way storms are beautiful, breathtaking, destructive, inevitable. "I appreciate what you did," he continued, leaning forward slightly, elbows on the table. "Most people in this city avoid her. They think kindness draws attention, and attention is costly." "I didn't mean to disrespect you," I whispered. A low sound, half laugh, half sigh, escaped him. "Disrespect?" He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing with faint amusement. "No, ragazza. You did something rare. You saw her." His gaze drifted briefly toward Livia, then back to me. "And she saw you." Something in the way he said it made my pulse stutter, because it didn't sound like praise, it sounded like a verdict. Like he had decided that my moment of kindness now belonged to him, that my small act of humanity had tied me to his world whether I wanted it or not. Then he stood, smooth and unhurried, and the movement itself seemed to shift the air. He gestured for one of his men to escort Livia, and she rose obediently, glancing back at me once, her fingers brushing subtly against her palm. A silent thank you, or maybe goodbye. Before I could return the gesture, Alessio spoke again, his tone soft but cutting. You will come to the villa tomorrow. The words didn't register at first. What? He looked at me as though I'd misunderstood something very simple. Livia needs someone she can trust, someone who speaks her language. You will come, 11 o'clock. I should have refused. I should have told him I couldn't, that I had shifts, that I wasn't his employee. But the look in his eyes made the word no dissolve before it could leave my tongue. When I didn't answer, he smiled. Faint, dangerous, satisfied. Good. And just like that, the conversation was over. He turned, the men closing around him in a silent orbit, and together they left the restaurant the way thunder leaves the sky, abruptly, leaving the world too still, too quiet in their wake. I stood there long after the door shut, my hands shaking, the espresso untouched before me. Around me, conversation hesitantly returned, laughter forced and brittle. Someone muttered, "You're lucky he didn't kill you." And I almost laughed, though it came out as a gasp, because they didn't understand. It wasn't luck that had brushed past me tonight. It was interest. And interest from a man like Alessio Moretti was far more dangerous. The next morning, I didn't sleep. I spent hours pacing my apartment, arguing with myself. Every logical part of me said not to go. People didn't just walk into the lion's den because he asked nicely. But then I thought of Livia. Her quiet smile, her trembling hands, the loneliness that radiated from her like something tangible. And the decision made itself. At 10:45, I stood outside a wrought iron gate taller than any building I'd ever worked in. Beyond it, the Moretti estate sprawled like a fortress carved out of wealth and history. Marble walls gleaming against the morning light. The kind of beauty that hides its own ugliness beneath polish. 2 guards checked my name, their faces unreadable, and the gate opened without a word. The driveway wound through olive trees and roses, ending at a house that didn't look like a home, but a monument to someone's power. I stepped out, every nerve in my body aware that somewhere, behind those windows, Alessio was watching. Livia greeted me herself, her face lighting up when she saw me. She signed quickly, excited, relieved, like a child who'd found something precious she thought she'd lost. I followed her inside, my heart softening as she led me through the sunlit halls lined with paintings of saints and sinners, marble angels who looked down like they pitied us. We spent the morning together in her room, a space filled with light and soft colors, nothing like the dark exterior of the mansion. She showed me her drawings, the notebooks where she wrote words she couldn't say aloud, and as she signed stories about her mother, her friends, her dreams, I forgot where I was, forgot the danger that came with every wall in this house. For a while it was just us, 2 women bound by silence, sharing something fragile and real. Then, sometime after lunch, the air shifted again. A knock, and the door opened. Alessio stepped in, no suit jacket this time, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. He looked less like a crime lord and more like a man, which somehow made him even more dangerous. Livia smiled at him, signed something quick and affectionate. He brushed her hair from her face, his expression softening, and for a heartbeat I saw something human there. But when his eyes turned to me, that warmth vanished, replaced by calculation. "She likes you," he said quietly. "That's unusual." I hesitated. "She's easy to like." He took a slow step closer, then another, until he stood close enough that I could smell the faint trace of his cologne. Something dark, expensive, like smoke and cedar. "You're brave," he said, almost thoughtfully. "Or foolish. Most people tremble when I look at them. You don't." I'm trembling inside, I whispered before I could stop myself. His mouth curved, the smallest, most dangerous smile. Good. That means you understand what kind of man you're dealing with. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was alive, charged with something I didn't have a name for, something that felt like fear and fascination tangled together. Then, without warning, a sound shattered it. A gunshot, distant but distinct, echoing from somewhere outside. Livia flinched, covering her ears instinctively. Alessio didn't even blink. He turned his head slightly, listening, then looked back at me with eyes that had turned cold again. "Stay here," he said, voice low and final. But as he turned toward the door, I heard my name. My name, spoken in that same smooth tone that had both command and promise woven into it. "Don't move, ragazza, whatever happens next. Remember, you chose to come here." Then he was gone, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall, leaving me in that too quiet room, my heart pounding against my ribs, Livia's frightened eyes locked on mine, and the sound of another gunshot tearing through the air outside. And in that moment, I understood. Whatever world I had stepped into, there was no way back. The sound of the second gunshot didn't just echo. It vibrated through the air, a low, metallic thunder that seemed to rattle the glass in the windows and crawl up my spine. And in that frozen heartbeat afterward, the world felt like it had been stripped of color, leaving only the dull, cold pulse of fear. Livia clutched my arm, her fingers digging into my sleeve, eyes wide, searching my face for something she couldn't hear, for the answer she always had to read in other people's expressions. I didn't know what to tell her. I signed quickly. "Stay here, don't move." She shook her head, terrified, but I pressed her shoulders gently until she sank back onto the bed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and before I could think better of it, I slipped out into the hallway. The mansion felt different now. The quiet no longer serene but tense, as if the walls themselves had gone alert. The sound of footsteps thundered somewhere below, men shouting orders in clipped Italian, the heavy slam of doors opening and closing. I moved toward the stairs, drawn by something I couldn't name. Fear, curiosity, the impossible need to see for myself what kind of man Alessio Moretti really was when the mask came off. At the bottom of the staircase, the marble floor gleamed under the chandelier's trembling light, and at the far end of the hall, the door to the courtyard hung half open, letting in a slice of sunlight that glowed red and strange, like dusk had come early. I hesitated only for a moment before stepping outside. The air smelled of iron and smoke. There were men everywhere, some standing rigid, others crouched beside a body sprawled across the tiles. Blood spread beneath it like a shadow that couldn't be cleaned. The man's face was turned away, but the gun beside his hand told me what had happened before anyone spoke. And then I saw him. Alessio stood a few feet away, sleeves rolled up, his white shirt splattered with crimson across the cuff, his expression unreadable as he spoke to the men around him in low, measured tones. It wasn't panic, wasn't rage. It was control, absolute and terrifying, like the violence around him was just another language he spoke fluently. One of the men noticed me first, his hand twitching toward his gun. Alessio's voice cut through the air, a single word I didn't understand, but whatever it was made the man freeze instantly. Then his eyes turned toward me, and the moment they met mine, I felt my breath falter. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice too calm. "I heard—" I stopped, the words sticking in my throat as my gaze dropped to the blood, to the motionless hand resting palm up on the cold tile. "I just wanted to make sure—" His steps were slow as he approached, deliberate, almost lazy, but every movement radiated command. When he stopped in front of me, the distance between us barely a breath, he said softly, "You disobeyed me." "I couldn't just sit." "You could have," he interrupted, His tone still quiet but sharper now, like silk hiding a blade. And you should have. This. He gestured vaguely toward the men behind him, toward the silent chaos. Is not your world. I'm starting to think I don't know what your world even is, I whispered. Something flickered in his eyes then. Not anger, not quite, but something more dangerous, something like interest laced with warning. You're learning, he said. He turned, gestured to one of the guards, muttered an order I couldn't catch. 2 men dragged the body away through the far gate, leaving behind a dark streak, across the stone that the sunlight couldn't erase. My stomach churned, but I couldn't look away. Not from the blood, not from him. He must have seen it on my face, the horror, the confusion, because his voice softened when he spoke again. He betrayed me, Alessio said simply, as though that explained everything, as though death was just an equation he'd solved correctly. He tried to sell information that would have put my daughter at risk. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound naive. He studied me, eyes narrowing slightly, as if searching for disgust or judgment, and when he didn't find it, his gaze drifted lower, not leering, just assessing, like he was trying to decide what kind of creature I was, the kind that fled from monsters or the kind that learned to live among them. You shouldn't be here, he murmured finally, and for a moment his voice wasn't the boss's. It was a man's, weary, almost regretful. Go back to her. Keep her calm. I'll come soon. Something in the way he said I'll come soon made my pulse quicken. Not from fear, but from the strange, inexplicable pull that seemed to exist between us since the moment we'd spoken. I nodded, turned, and hurried back inside. But halfway down the hall, I stopped. There was blood on my shoe, a small smear, bright and wet. I wiped it against the carpet, but it left a faint mark anyway, a reminder I couldn't erase. When I reached Livia's room, she was standing by the window, trembling, her hands pressed together tightly. I signed to her. It's okay. Your father's fine. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. So I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around her, holding her until her breathing steadied, though mine never did. We stayed like that for a long time, sunlight shifting across the floor, the sounds outside fading into stillness. Later, when the door opened again, I expected one of the guards. Instead, it was Alessio. His shirt was clean now, his hair damp as if he'd washed away the blood. But something about him felt heavier, a quiet that wasn't peace but aftermath. Livia ran to him, and he held her tightly, murmuring something in Italian she couldn't hear but understood anyway. His eyes, when they lifted to meet mine over her shoulder, were unreadable again, but softer at the edges. He sent her to the balcony with a gesture, and when she was gone, he said quietly, "You shouldn't have seen that." "I've seen worse," I said, though it wasn't true. He smiled faintly, a ghost of amusement. "No, you haven't." He moved closer, his presence filling the room like smoke, his gaze catching the faint tremor in my hands. "You're shaking." "I'm not afraid of you," I lied. He reached out then, slow enough that I could have stepped away but didn't, his fingers brushing the back of my wrist. Light, deliberate, grounding. "You should be," he said softly. "Fear keeps people alive." But his touch wasn't cruel. It was human. And in that contradiction, something inside me shifted. The part that should have run screaming turned still instead, watching him, drawn in despite everything I knew about men like him. He released my hand, straightened, and said, "From now on, you stay here. With her. My men will bring what you need." "You mean, live here?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "You belong to this house now." It wasn't a question. It was a declaration, spoken like an inevitability. I wanted to protest, to remind him that I had a life outside these marble walls. But then I looked at Livia, at her small, uncertain smile as she watched us from the balcony, and I realized that leaving might break something fragile I'd just begun to fix. So I nodded, and Alessio smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, but with the quiet satisfaction of a man who always gets what he wants. When he left, the scent of his cologne lingered in the air, blending with the faint trace of gunpowder that still clung to the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the streak of blood that had dried on the floor near the door, and for the first time, I wondered if kindness was just another way of stepping into a cage, one you didn't realize had locked behind you until it was too late. Outside, somewhere beyond the high walls, another gunshot echoed, distant this time, but real enough to make the windows hum. And I knew then, with cold certainty, that I hadn't just met a dangerous man. I had entered his world. The first night I stayed in the Moretti villa, I couldn't sleep, not because of the silence, but because of how alive it felt, as if the walls themselves were listening, carrying whispers from one room to another, secrets brushing against the edges of my thoughts like moths against glass. The house was too big, too quiet, every creak a reminder that I didn't belong here, every shadow carrying the weight of eyes I couldn't see. The guest room they gave me was larger than my entire apartment, with tall windows draped in velvet and a bed so soft it felt like falling into fog. Yet I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the blood I'd seen on the tiles that afternoon, the calm in Alessio's eyes as he'd spoken to his men, the warmth in his voice when he'd told me to stay. It didn't make sense. A man capable of such brutality shouldn't have been able to speak so gently, and yet the contradiction haunted me. When I finally drifted into sleep, I dreamed of hands signing in the dark, of words made of movement and light, and of a voice, his voice, saying, "You belong to this house now." Morning came softly, sunlight filtering through sheer curtains, painting the room gold. I woke to the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway and a knock on the door. When I opened it, one of his men stood there, stiff and silent, holding a tray with breakfast, coffee, fruit, bread still warm enough to steam. I thanked him, but he didn't respond, only inclined his head slightly before disappearing down the hall. It struck me then that in this house, even the servants didn't speak unless spoken to, as if words themselves were rationed, measured, owned. After breakfast, I found Livia waiting for me in the garden. The air smelled of roses and damp earth, the kind of morning that almost convinced you the world was kind. She ran to me, smiling, her hands flying with questions. "Did you sleep? Do you like it here? Will you stay forever?" Her joy was infectious, but the last question caught in my throat. "We'll see," I signed back. She didn't seem to notice my hesitation. She was too busy showing me the fountain at the garden's center, the one shaped like a marble swan. She told me, through gestures and scribbled words, that her mother used to sit here, that her father had the fountain built because she loved swans. As she spoke, I looked up toward the terrace above, and saw him. Alessio stood at the railing, his suit jacket discarded, a glass in his hand, watching us. He didn't move, didn't wave, but I felt his attention like sunlight, too warm, too direct. It wasn't leering, it was assessing, as if I were a page he was reading line by line, deciding what kind of story I'd become. I pretended not to notice, continued signing with Livia, but my hands trembled just slightly, betraying me. Later, when we went back inside, he was waiting in the hallway. "You adapt quickly," he said. His tone was unreadable, somewhere between compliment and observation. "It's easy with her," I replied. He smiled faintly, a rare expression that made him seem almost human. "Yes, she has that effect." Then after a pause, "She trusts you." I nodded, unsure where this was leading. She doesn't trust anyone, he continued, stepping closer, the light catching on the ring he wore. Not even me sometimes. But you, she listens to you. She laughs. Do you know how long it's been since she laughed? There was something raw beneath his words, something that almost sounded like pain. And before I could stop myself, I said softly, You love her more than anything. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp, guarded. She's the only good thing I ever made. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us tightened, heavy with things that didn't need saying. Then he straightened, the softness gone, and said, Come to dinner tonight, 8 o'clock. No excuses. It wasn't a request, but I nodded anyway. When evening came, I found a dress waiting for me. Black silk, simple but elegant, laid carefully across the bed. I didn't need to ask who had sent it. It fit perfectly, as if someone had known my size before I did. I stared at myself in the mirror for a long time before leaving the room, trying to see what he might see. A waitress turned, guessed, or perhaps something closer to a possession he'd chosen without asking. The dining hall was lit by candles that threw long shadows across the table. Alessio was already there, sitting at the head, a decanter of wine before him. He rose when I entered, and for a fleeting second, the gesture almost felt courteous. Sit, he said. The meal was quiet, too quiet. I wasn't sure if he expected conversation, but he seemed content to watch, to fill the silence with his presence. Eventually, he spoke. You're not afraid of me anymore? I'm trying not to be, I admitted. He studied me for a long moment. Fear keeps you sharp. But too much fear makes you useless. You've found the balance. I didn't know whether to take that as praise. Is that how you live? I asked. Balanced between fear and control? He smiled faintly, swirling the wine in his glass. Control is the only balance I trust. I wanted to ask more. About the man in the courtyard? About the blood? But his expression warned me not to. So instead I said, Livia said you built the fountain for her mother. His hand stilled, glass midair. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Grief, maybe, or guilt. She shouldn't talk about her, he said quietly. I'm sorry, I murmured. He set the glass down, leaned back in his chair, and looked at me as if deciding whether to let me stay in this conversation or send me away. Do you believe in second chances? He asked suddenly. The question startled me. I think people can change if they want to. And if they don't want to, then they probably won't, I said, watching him carefully. His mouth curved, but it wasn't a smile. You're honest. That's dangerous in my world. Something in his tone made my heart race, though I couldn't tell if it was fear or something darker. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. He rose, circled the table, and stopped behind my chair. I could feel the heat of his presence, the shadow of him falling across me. You should be careful, he said softly. Honesty gets people killed. Then he was gone, leaving the scent of wine and smoke behind him, the faint echo of his footsteps disappearing down the corridor. I sat there for a long time, staring at the flickering candles, the untouched food, the empty chair at the head of the table. The silence pressed against me like a living thing. When I finally returned to my room, Livia was asleep, curled against the pillows like a child. I stood by the window, looking out at the dark garden below, at the faint gleam of moonlight on the marble swan. Somewhere beyond the trees, I heard the distant rumble of cars, voices, and a single sharp sound that might have been laughter or pain. I couldn't tell. And as I watched the shadows move across the lawn, I realized the house itself wasn't silent at all. It was speaking, in creaks, in whispers, in breaths caught between walls. And what it was saying over and over, was that once you stepped inside, you didn't leave unchanged. I touched the window glass, cool beneath my fingertips, and thought of Alessio's words. Control is the only balance I trust. But as the night deepened and the candles burned low, I wondered if even he still had control, or if, somewhere beneath the weight of this house and its ghosts, something in him was beginning to unravel. The next evening came draped in the same heavy quiet that had become the rhythm of this house, a quiet that didn't feel peaceful but deliberate, as though silence itself was one of Alessio's rules, something enforced, expected, obeyed. I could feel it the moment I descended the stairs, each footstep echoing across the marble like an intrusion. The chandeliers burned low and golden, and the smell of old wine and polished wood lingered in the air. A scent that felt too rich, too heavy, too much like power. When I entered the dining room, Alessio was already there, standing by the tall windows that overlooked the gardens. The night outside was slick with rain, and lightning flickered distantly over the city, catching the hard edges of his profile in brief, merciless flashes. He didn't turn when I came in. For a long moment I thought he hadn't heard me, until he said, without looking, "You're early." "I thought you didn't like people keeping you waiting," I said before I could stop myself. His reflection in the glass shifted, not quite a smile, not quite a threat. "You learn quickly." He gestured toward the table. Dinner was already served. Grilled sea bass, lemon and herbs, a bottle of something deep red. But he didn't sit right away. Instead, he poured the wine, his movements unhurried, precise, like a man who understood that patience was another form of dominance. "I used to cook," I said, surprising myself again. Maybe it was the silence that made me feel it. Or maybe it was him. The way he drew things out of me without ever asking questions. He glanced up. "Where?" "At the restaurant, before I started waiting tables. They didn't trust me with the expensive orders, but I liked the rhythm, the sound of knives, the smell of garlic and smoke. It made sense. It was honest." "Honest," he repeated quietly, rolling the word over his tongue as though tasting it. "You keep using that word, like it means something. Doesn't it?" "In my world," he said, finally sitting across from me, "honesty is just another currency. It buys loyalty until someone richer comes along." There was no bitterness in his voice, only fact, which somehow made it worse. I studied him. The sharpness of his jaw, the scar faintly visible near his temple, the weariness that clung to him like smoke. "You sound tired of your world," I said softly. He looked up then. Really looked. And for a heartbeat I thought he might deny it. But he didn't. "Tired isn't the right word," he said. "It's more like accustomed. You can get used to anything, even damnation." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. We ate in silence for a while, the clink of silverware against porcelain filling the room like a metronome. The storm outside grew louder, rain sweeping against the windows in frantic sheets. After a while, he said, almost idly, "You shouldn't stay here too long." I looked up. "Do you want me to leave?" His gaze held mine, unreadable, dangerous. "That's not what I said." "Then what are you saying?" "That my world has teeth," he said quietly, "and it bites what it likes." I swallowed hard, unsure whether the tremor in my chest was fear or something darker. "And you think it likes me?" His mouth curved just slightly, though his eyes didn't soften. "It noticed you." Lightning split the sky outside, casting a brief, sharp glow across his face. For an instant, he looked almost unearthly, the kind of man you'd follow even knowing he was leading you straight into ruin. When the thunder rolled, it rattled the glasses. I realized my hands were trembling. He noticed. He always noticed. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, his voice lower now, almost gentle. "That's easy for you to say." No, he murmured, leaning forward. It isn't. The silence stretched. The air between us seemed to hum with something that wasn't quite threat and wasn't quite comfort. I could feel it pull at me, the same way you feel the tide pulling just before you're swept under. Finally, I pushed back from the table. I should check on Livia. She's asleep, he said. I hesitated. You checked? He smiled faintly. I check everything. There it was again, that reminder that nothing in this house happened without his knowledge. And yet, even knowing that, even feeling the weight of his control pressing against every breath I took, part of me wanted to stay. It made no sense. He rose from his chair. Come with me. Where? He didn't answer. He simply started walking, and after a moment I followed. We passed through the long corridors, the storm's voice muffled by the thick walls. He led me down a flight of stairs I hadn't noticed before, into a lower level that smelled faintly of stone and wine. The cellar was enormous, rows of bottles disappearing into darkness, the air cool and damp. He stopped before a heavy wooden door and unlocked it with a key he wore on a chain. Inside was a small room. No windows, only a single hanging bulb. The walls were lined with photographs, some yellowed with age, others recent. I recognized Livia in several younger, smiling beside a woman I didn't know. Her mother, Alessio said quietly. She was beautiful, I whispered. She was, he said. And she hated this life. I told her I could keep her safe, but I lied. Or maybe I just didn't understand what safety meant in my world. He reached up and touched one of the photos. A candid one, sunlight in her hair. Livia doesn't remember her like this. She remembers the noise, the fear, the sirens. I built this house to keep her away from it, but all I did was lock the ghosts inside with us. His voice had changed. Lower, rougher, not the cold precision I'd grown used to. I wanted to say something, but the words tangled in my throat. So I just stood there, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough to sense the ache he carried like armor. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes shadowed but searching. Because you listen, he said, and because you haven't asked me for anything, not money, not favor, not escape. You just see her, and now you see me. Something in my chest shifted, like the faint crack of ice thawing. He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough that the air between us felt alive. Then he said quietly, If you're going to stay in this house, you need to understand. It changes people. You won't leave the same. I wanted to tell him I wasn't afraid, but the truth was I was. Not of him. Not even of the danger that surrounded him, but of the way his voice could make my pulse stumble. The way the darkness here didn't just frighten me. It called to me. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Alessio turned away, his expression closing like a door. Go upstairs, he said. The storm's getting worse. I hesitated. What about you? I have work to do. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with the ghosts, the photographs, and the echo of a confession that felt too heavy for one room to hold. As I made my way back up the stairs, the house groaned under the weight of the wind. Lightning flared through the windows, and for an instant, I thought I saw someone standing at the end of the corridor. A shadow, tall and still. When I blinked, it was gone. But something in the air had changed, a current I could feel on my skin. Warning, promise, both. And somewhere below, I heard a door slam, a voice raised, then silence, the kind that comes right before everything breaks. The storm did not stop that night. It only deepened, stretching into the early hours, battering the windows until the glass trembled, and the sound of thunder sank into my bones like a pulse that wasn't mine. I tried to sleep, but the air was too charged, thick with electricity and something else. A tension that had begun downstairs and followed me up like a shadow. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing in that cellar, his fingers on the photograph of his wife, his voice carrying a weight it hadn't before, as if confessing had cost him something he didn't know how to reclaim. I lay there, listening to the rain and the low hum of the house. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened, soft and cautious. I sat up. The sound came again, lighter this time, almost tentative. I slipped from bed and pulled on the robe someone had left folded at the foot, the silk whispering against my skin. When I stepped into the hallway, the lights flickered once, then steadied, and I caught sight of a small figure moving toward the stairwell. "Livia," I whispered. She turned, startled, her eyes wide in the dim light. I hurried to her, crouching so we were face to face. "You should be asleep," I signed. She hesitated, then lifted her hands and signed back. I had a nightmare. The thunder woke me. I smiled softly. "Do you want me to stay with you?" She nodded, but her gaze shifted toward the end of the corridor, toward the heavy double doors that led to Alessio's study. Her hands moved again, slower this time. "He's downstairs. He's angry." The words made something cold stir in my stomach. I took her hand, intending to lead her back to her room, but she resisted, her small fingers tightening around mine. "He's not alone," she signed. Before I could ask what she meant, a sound drifted up from below. Faint but unmistakable. Voices. Not raised, not shouting, but sharp, clipped, urgent. The kind of voices that knew the value of being quiet even when angry. I hesitated, torn between curiosity and fear. But Livia tugged my hand again, and in that moment I understood. She'd come to me not just because she was frightened, but because she wanted someone else to see what she saw, to confirm the world she lived in wasn't just a dream of danger whispered through walls. So I followed her. We moved like ghosts down the staircase, careful to avoid the steps that creaked. The light from the study spilled faintly into the hall, a golden crack beneath the door. I could hear Alessio's voice, low but sharp, each word a deliberate cut. Another man answered, deeper, colder, someone I didn't recognize. Livia pressed close to me, her fingers gripping my sleeve. I bent down, whispering, "Stay here." She shook her head, eyes wide with stubbornness, but I pressed a finger to my lips. After a moment, she nodded reluctantly. I crept closer, close enough to hear. "You were supposed to keep her out of it," Alessio was saying. "She's just a girl." "The girl's the problem," the other man replied. "You think they don't know? You think she's invisible because she can't hear?" There was the sharp sound of glass breaking, Alessio's temper shattering through restraint. "You talk about my daughter again, and I'll put you through that window." For a moment, there was only the hiss of the storm. Then the other man said, quieter now, "It's too late for threats, Alessio. They already know she exists, and they'll use her." My heart stopped. I didn't understand who they were, but I could hear the truth in the man's tone. This wasn't just about crime, or loyalty, or money. This was something older, deeper, more dangerous. When Alessio spoke again, his voice had changed, no longer angry but deadly calm. "Then I'll burn every bridge before I let them touch her?" Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and then silence. I backed away, pulse racing, but in my hurry my heel brushed against a loose board. The faintest creak, barely a sound, but enough. The conversation below stopped. A beat later, the study door opened. I froze. Alessio stood there, framed by the light, his eyes finding mine immediately. And though he said nothing, I knew he'd known I was there the whole time. The other man was gone. Or maybe he'd never been real. "Go back upstairs," Alessio said softly. Now. There was no anger in his voice, just authority, the kind that didn't need volume to be obeyed. I turned, grabbed Livia's hand, and led her back up the stairs. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. She could read it in my face. When we reached her room, she climbed into bed without protest. I sat beside her until her breathing slowed, until the rain softened to a whisper. Then I slipped out and went to my own room, but sleep didn't come. My mind was too loud, full of questions that didn't have safe answers. At dawn, the house was unnervingly still. I went to the kitchen for coffee, needing something solid to hold on to. One of the guards was there, silent as ever, but he nodded to me, respectful. I thought about asking where Alessio was, but the words caught before they reached my lips. I didn't have to wonder long. He appeared in the doorway, wearing the same suit as the night before. Though his tie was gone, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "Come with me," he said. I followed him to the garden, the grass slick from rain, the air sharp with morning chill. The world smelled clean, deceptively innocent. He stopped near the fountain, where the marble swan glistened pale under the weak sun. "You shouldn't have been there last night," he said. I didn't mean to listen. "But you did." "Yes." He studied me, hands clasped loosely behind his back. "What did you hear?" I hesitated. Enough to know someone's threatening her. A muscle in his jaw tightened. "Then you know why I can't let anyone close to her. Not friends, not teachers, not strangers. And yet I let you in." "Because she trusts me." He nodded slowly. "And that's exactly what makes this dangerous." I wanted to ask who they are, what he was protecting her from, but I sensed he wouldn't answer. Instead, he said, "You think this house is quiet because of her hearing. It isn't. It's quiet because silence is the only thing that keeps us alive." The words settled over me like fog, cold and suffocating. "And me?" I asked quietly. "What happens to someone who breaks that silence?" He turned, toward me then, his eyes unreadable. "That depends," he said, "on whether they're worth protecting." And before I could breathe, before I could speak or move or understand, he took my hand. Not roughly, not gently, but as though testing something fragile, and said, "Don't give me a reason to regret trusting you." Then he walked away, leaving me alone beside the fountain, the water rippling under the first hesitant rays of sunlight. I stood there long after he'd gone, staring at my reflection in the water, the girl who had walked into this house to help a child, and the woman who now stood at the edge of something she couldn't name. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint hum of engines, cars approaching, maybe leaving. And though the morning looked calm, every instinct in me whispered that the storm hadn't passed at all. It had only gone quiet. Too quiet. The cars arrived just after noon, their engines breaking the villa's heavy stillness like thunder rolling over stone. I was in the kitchen with Livia, helping her slice apples, when the sound reached us. Deep, deliberate, the kind of engines that announce power long before faces appear. Livia's knife paused midair. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then to me, and though she didn't speak, the fear that moved through her was sharp and clear, like the crack of a match in the dark. "Who is it?" she signed quickly. I hesitated. "I don't know." She dropped the knife and ran to the window. I followed, peering through the lace curtain. 3 black sedans were gliding through the iron gates, their tinted windows reflecting the pale midday light. Men stepped out, tall, dressed in suits, their movements too measured, too familiar. Not strangers, then. Associates. But their presence made the air feel thinner, harder to breathe. Livia's hands moved again, trembling. "They don't come here." He told them never to. Her words chilled me. I turned to her, lowering my voice. Go upstairs, sweetheart. Stay in your room. Don't open the door for anyone but your father or me. Promise. She hesitated, then nodded. I watched her run toward the staircase, her braid swinging behind her, small feet silent against the marble. The moment she disappeared, I felt the weight of the house shift, that invisible hum of tension that always preceded Alessio's arrival. He appeared seconds later, moving through the hall like a storm in human form, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight enough to cut glass. "Upstairs," he said without looking at me. "I already sent her." He stopped, turned. "And you?" "I'm staying." His eyes darkened, not in anger, but in something more dangerous. "You don't belong in the room that's about to open." "Then maybe it shouldn't open." A flicker of something, surprise, maybe even respect, passed across his face. But he didn't argue. He simply said, "Stay out of sight," and walked toward the front hall. I followed, silent, keeping close to the wall as the double doors opened and the men entered. Their leader was older, lean, his hair silver at the temples, his smile too polite to be genuine. He greeted Alessio like an equal, with a handshake that looked more like a test of strength. "Alessio," the man said, his accent sharp, European. "It's been too long." "Not long enough," Alessio replied. The man's gaze swept the room, lingering on the staircase where I hid in shadow. I ducked back before he could see me, but the momentary glance was enough. He was the kind of man who noticed everything. "I hear your daughter's doing well," he said, almost casually. "Growing up fast." Alessio's reply was a blade wrapped in silk. "My family isn't part of our business." The man chuckled. "In this world, everything is part of the business." The room went still. I could almost feel the temperature drop. Another voice joined, one of the other men, younger, impatient. "We came for an answer. You can't keep pretending this war doesn't touch you." "I don't pretend," Alessio said softly. "I decide." "And what have you decided?" There was a long pause. When Alessio finally spoke, his words were quiet. Too quiet. "That if anyone comes near my daughter, I'll bury them before they reach the gate." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The silver-haired man's smile faded. "Careful, old friend. There are lines even you shouldn't cross." "I stopped believing in lines when they crossed mine first," Alessio said. For a moment I thought the room would explode, that someone would draw a weapon, that the storm outside would finally break inside these walls. But instead the man gave a small, almost amused nod. "Then I hope your silence is worth the price it will cost you." And just like that, they turned and left, the echo of their footsteps vanishing into the roar of departing engines. When the doors finally shut, Alessio stood still for a long time, his hands clenched at his sides, his breathing slow and deliberate, like a man trying to cage something feral inside him. I stepped out from the shadows. "Who were they?" He didn't answer. "Alessio." He turned then, and the look in his eyes stopped me cold. "You shouldn't have been here," he said. "You can't keep me blind in this house," I shot back. "Not if I'm part of it now." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and for a moment the silence between us thickened until I thought it might suffocate us both. Then slowly the corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, more like disbelief. "Part of it," he repeated. "You have no idea what that means." "Then tell me." He walked toward me, the space between us shrinking until I could smell the faint trace of rain and smoke clinging to his shirt. "It means loyalty has a price," he said quietly. "And once you pay, there's no refund." I didn't move. I couldn't. "And you think I'd regret it?" "I think," he said, his voice a low whisper now, You're the first person in years who doesn't know enough to be afraid. Lightning flared outside, white and sharp, throwing our shadows against the wall. For a heartbeat, neither of us looked away. Then he turned, exhaled slowly, and said, "Pack a bag." "What?" "Livia, you're leaving for a few days." I stared at him, confusion rising. "Leaving where?" "Somewhere safe." "And you?" "I'll stay." Something twisted in my chest. "You're sending us away because of them." "I'm sending you away because you're the only leverage I have left that can't bleed." The words hit harder than they should have. "So that's all I am? Leverage?" His expression softened, just slightly. "You were never supposed to matter this much." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, his face hardening. "They're already watching," he murmured. "Go, now." I ran. Not because he ordered me to, but because something in his voice told me that this wasn't a night to argue. Upstairs, I found Livia waiting by the window, her eyes wide, her hands trembling. "They're coming, aren't they?" she signed. I nodded. "Your father's sending us away." Her face crumpled, and she shook her head violently. "I won't leave him." I caught her shoulders gently. "You have to trust him. Just this once." She didn't answer, but when the headlights flared outside again, she understood. We both did. Within minutes, one of Alessio's men appeared, silent, efficient, holding 2 coats. He didn't speak, only gestured toward the back entrance. As we followed him through the dark corridor, I turned for one last look. Alessio was standing by the window again, phone in hand, eyes fixed on the storm beyond the gates. He didn't see me watching, but I knew, somehow, that he felt it. And though I couldn't hear his thoughts, I could almost imagine the words he might have spoken if silence weren't the only language this house understood. "Don't look back." But as the door shut behind us, and the rain swallowed the night, I did. Because something inside me whispered that the real danger wasn't the men outside. It was the storm that lived within him, and the part of me that couldn't stop walking toward it. The road out of the city felt endless, the rain turning from a whisper to a downpour that blurred the world into streaks of gray. We drove for hours, headlights carving through mist and silence, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic beat of water against the windshield. Livia leaned against me in the back seat, her head heavy on my shoulder, fingers twisted in the hem of my sleeve as though the smallest movement might shatter what little peace we had left. The man driving never spoke. I didn't know his name, only that he was one of Alessio's oldest, the kind whose silence came from loyalty, not fear. Every so often he would glance into the mirror, checking the road behind us, his eyes as sharp as the pistol resting near the gearshift. We reached the safe house just before dawn, a forgotten villa at the edge of the countryside, half buried in vines and the smell of wet earth. It wasn't beautiful, but it was quiet, and for the first time since the visitors came, I could breathe without feeling like the walls were listening. The man handed me a set of keys and a folded note. "He said not to call," he muttered, his voice gravel low. "He'll contact you when it's clear." Before I could answer, he was already back in the car, the tires spitting mud as he disappeared down the narrow road. I stood in the doorway, clutching the note, watching the taillights vanish like dying embers. Livia touched my arm. "What did he say?" "That we wait." She frowned. "He's in danger, isn't he?" I didn't lie. "Yes." We entered the villa, and the smell of dust and disuse wrapped around us. The furniture was covered in sheets, the air cold enough to see our breath. I lit a small lamp on the table and unfolded the note, the ink smudged but still legible. "Stay until I send for you. Trust no one. A." The simplicity of it frightened me more than anything else. The days that followed blurred together. The same silent breakfast, The same careful glances out the window. The same empty stretch of road that never brought news. At night, Livia would sit by the fire, her small hands moving through the air in restless patterns. Sometimes she would sign stories, fragments of things she remembered before her mother died. The garden, the songs she could only feel through vibration, the way her father used to laugh before the world took that sound away from him. I listened, and even without hearing, I could feel the weight of every word she shaped. But one evening, as the fire burned low and the shadows grew long, she asked me something that made the world tilt slightly on its axis. "Do you think he's keeping secrets from me?" I looked at her, startled. What kind of secrets? She hesitated, then signed slowly. About my mother. About why she really died. I tried to keep my expression steady. He told me it was an accident. Her hands froze midair. That's not true. The words hit like a gunshot. I leaned forward. What do you mean? I was there, she signed, her movements trembling but deliberate. I saw someone that night. A man. He came to the house after midnight. Father was gone. Mother argued with him. Then I heard a crash. When I went downstairs, she was gone. Her eyes glistened in the firelight, and I saw the reflection of something raw. Memory, fear, guilt. When Father came home, he told me never to speak of it again. He said it would keep me safe. My heart pounded. And you think the man who came that night was connected to those visitors? She nodded. He had the same ring, the same voice. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The room seemed to shrink around us, the walls closing in with every breath. If Livia's mother hadn't died by accident, then everything Alessio built, every silence, every threat, every shadow, was standing on the edge of that secret. The realization left a bitter taste in my mouth. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window long after Livia had drifted into dreams, staring out at the mist-covered fields, the world quiet except for the faint hiss of rain. Somewhere out there, Alessio was fighting ghosts I couldn't see, and the thought of him alone, of what he might be doing to protect us, felt unbearable. I unfolded his note again, tracing the letters with my thumb. Trust no one. But what if the person we couldn't trust was him? The next morning, a sound woke me. Faint, metallic, distant. I slipped from bed, careful not to wake Livia, and followed the noise through the hallway to the back of the house. The wind had picked up, whistling through broken shutters, but beneath it I heard it again. A scrape, a click. Someone was outside. My pulse hammered as I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a kitchen knife, and moved toward the door. The lock trembled. Slowly I pressed my ear against the wood, listening. Then in one sharp instant, the door swung open. A man stood in the threshold, not Alessio's guard, not anyone I recognized. He was thin, pale, soaked from the rain, and his smile was wrong, too calm for a stranger who'd just broken into someone's home. "Easy," he said softly, raising one hand. "I'm not here to hurt you." The knife didn't move. "Then why are you here?" He stepped forward, boots dripping onto the tiles. "Because I know who you're hiding." Before I could react, Livia appeared in the hallway behind me. Her eyes widened, and she froze, her hands instinctively lifting. The man's gaze softened. "You look just like her," he murmured. I didn't understand at first. Her who? But then I saw it. The faint scar across his jaw, the glint of the same silver ring the visitor wore in Alessio's study. Livia's hands moved in a blur. "That's him." My stomach dropped. He smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. "Tell your father," he said quietly, "that the past never stays buried." And then he turned and vanished into the storm before I could take a step. I stood frozen in the doorway, the knife still trembling in my grip, the rain splattering across the threshold. When I finally looked back, Livia was crying. Silent, shaking tears that fell without sound, her hands signing one thing over and over until I thought the motion might tear her apart. He's going to find him. And I knew she wasn't talking about the man who just left. She meant Alessio. Because whoever that stranger was, he hadn't come to threaten us. He'd come to warn us. And somewhere out there, in the storm, Alessio Kane was walking straight into the hands of the man who'd destroyed his wife, and who was about to destroy everything else he loved. The rain didn't stop for 3 days after he vanished. It came in endless sheets that blurred the world into silver and shadow, drowning the roads and filling the air with the smell of rust and earth, as if the sky itself was weeping for the things we couldn't name. Livia barely slept. Every hour she went to the window, peering into the storm as though her father might step out of it, soaked and smiling, pretending the danger was already gone. But each time she turned back, I saw the truth in her eyes. She knew he wasn't coming back for us, not yet. Not until it was finished. I couldn't bear the waiting anymore. By the 4th morning, I found myself standing in front of the mirror near the door, tying my hair back, pulling on my coat with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The knife I'd kept since the break-in was still on the table, its handle worn smooth from my touch. I slipped it into my bag before I could think too hard about it. Livia was sitting by the hearth, staring at the flames, her face pale in the flickering light. When I told her I was leaving, she didn't protest. She only signed 2 words: find him. I'll bring him back, I promised, though the sound of it felt fragile, like glass underfoot. She reached for my wrist, her fingers spelling slow, deliberate words against my skin. Don't let him go where she went. The weight of that sentence stayed with me as I stepped out into the storm. The roads were nearly empty, the countryside drowning beneath gray skies. I drove without knowing exactly where I was headed, following instinct more than reason, the same thread that had tied me to him since the moment our lives collided. The silence in the car was deafening. Every mile felt like a countdown I couldn't see. An hourglass bleeding sand faster than time could measure. When I finally reached the city outskirts, the rain had thinned to a cold mist, and the streets were slick with reflection. The world looked ghost-like, half real, half memory. I parked near the old shipping yard, the one Alessio had once mentioned in passing, his voice low and distant when he said he hated that place. If danger had a home, it was here. I slipped through the gate, my shoes sinking into mud and gravel. The warehouses loomed ahead, their windows shattered, the wind whistling through the cracks, like someone whispering secrets too softly to catch. Somewhere inside, I heard it, the faint echo of voices. I crept closer. The main doors were ajar. Through the gap, I saw them. Men in dark coats gathered around a table lit by a single hanging bulb. And in the center, bound to a chair but still impossibly calm, was Alessio. My heart stuttered. He looked battered but unbroken, blood on his cheek, his expression unreadable. A king, in exile, still wearing his crown of defiance. The man facing him was the one from the safe house. The silver ring gleamed as he paced, his voice sharp and measured. You had your chance, Kane. You could have walked away. Alessio's reply was almost a whisper. Men like us never walk away. We crawl until there's nothing left to crawl toward. The man laughed, a hollow sound. You always thought you were better than the rest of us. But everything you've built was bought with silence. Your wife's, your daughter's, even your own. At that, Alessio's eyes flicked up, dangerous and cold. Careful what you say about my wife. Why? The man asked. Because I was the one who told her the truth you couldn't bear to? I froze, the words hitting me like a physical blow. Alessio's wife, Livia's mother, hadn't been a casualty of business. She had known something he had hidden. The man leaned closer, his tone almost tender. She found out what you were doing with the council, the disappearances, the laundering through the orphan foundations. You killed her silence before it killed you. Alessio didn't move, but his hands clenched against the rope. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I do, the man said softly, and I think your daughter deserves to know too. Something inside me broke then. The quiet part of me that had been content to believe Alessio's sins were forgivable, that he was only a man protecting his family. The truth was more monstrous, and yet I couldn't bring myself to step back. I pushed the door open. The noise drew their attention instantly. Weapons raised, eyes snapping toward me. Alessio's expression shifted from shock to fury. What the hell are you doing here? Trying to stop you from destroying yourself, I said, my voice shaking but steady enough to carry. The man with the ring smiled, amused. Well, this is poetic. The waitress who speaks in silence comes to save her fallen king. He turned toward me fully now, and I saw what Livia must have seen that night. The same scar, the same cold delight and cruelty. Alessio's voice dropped, lethal. Let her go. She's not part of this. Not part of it? The man chuckled. She's the only part you still care about. And before I could move, he drew his gun. The sound of it clicking back shattered the air, and everything after that happened too fast. Alessio lunged forward, the chair splintering beneath him. The gun fired, the light exploded into chaos. I screamed his name, rushing forward as the room filled with smoke and the metallic scent of blood. When the noise cleared, the man was gone, the door swinging open to the storm. And Alessio was on the ground, his hand pressed to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. I dropped beside him. You're bleeding. It's not, he started, but the words broke apart in his throat. Don't talk, I whispered, pressing my hand over his wound. Don't you dare talk like this is the end. He caught my wrist, his grip weak but still commanding. You shouldn't have come. I had to. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a rasp. Always doing what I tell you not to. I looked down at him, tears mixing with rain. Tell me it's not true, Alessio. Tell me you didn't. His eyes met mine, dark and raw, and I saw the answer there. Not denial, but regret so deep it looked like ruin. I did what I had to, he whispered, to keep her safe. The words fell heavy between us, heavier than the sound of the storm outside. Then what are we now? I asked quietly. Alive, he said, for as long as we can be. I pressed harder against his wound, my hands slick with his blood, praying the sound of sirens in the distance meant salvation, not the end. And as the first flashes of blue light painted the broken windows, I realized that silence, his greatest weapon, his greatest curse, was about to be broken forever. Because when the truth finally spoke, it would not whisper. It would scream. The hospital smelled of rain and antiseptic, that strange blend of sterility and storm that clings to memory long after it fades. I sat by his bed for what felt like hours, maybe days. The clock on the wall meant nothing anymore. Alessio lay motionless beneath the harsh white light, his skin pale, his breathing shallow but steady, the machines tracing the fragile rhythm that separated life from silence. They said he would live, though no one promised how much of him would return. The bullet had missed his heart by less than an inch. That felt like something he would do. Dance with death, just close enough to taste it, then walk away as if he'd chosen the terms himself. Livia came the next morning, escorted by one of his men. When she saw him, her whole body went still, as if the world itself had stopped turning. She reached for his hand, her small fingers curling around his, and I watched the strength return to her shoulders, like a spark reigniting what grief had tried to drown. "He'll wake up," she signed. "He has to." I nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The world beyond the glass was pale and clean, the streets washed free of their sins, at least for a while. I wanted to believe that was a sign, that the storm had done its worst, and what came next would be quieter, easier, kinder. But life doesn't trade in mercy. It trades in choices, and every one of his choices had led us here. When he finally stirred, it was almost dusk. His eyes fluttered open slowly, the color of worn steel and smoke. For a moment, he didn't seem to see me, only the ceiling above him, the faint hum of the machines. Then his gaze shifted, and when it landed on mine, I felt the breath leave my lungs. "You're still here," he murmured. His voice was low, rough from days of silence. "I told you I would be." A faint, tired smile touched his lips. "You should have run when you had the chance." "I tried," I said softly, "but you ruined that for me." He closed his eyes again, not in pain, but in something that looked like surrender. "How's Livia?" "She's fine. She never left your side." "She shouldn't have had to live any of this," he said, his tone cracking like thin glass. "I wanted to give her a world without blood. Instead, I built her a cage lined with it." "She doesn't see it that way," I whispered. "She just wants her father." His silence said what words couldn't, that wanting and deserving are rarely the same thing. I reached for his hand. "You can still fix it, Alessio." He gave a faint laugh, though it hurt him to do so. "You don't fix men like me. You bury us and hope the ground forgets." I shook my head, tears burning behind my eyes. "You keep saying that, but every time you fall, you find a way to stand again. Maybe that's not redemption, but it's something close." He turned his head toward me, his gaze steady now. "You believe in forgiveness that much?" "I believe in the sound of it," I said. "It's quieter than guilt, but it lasts longer." He looked at me for a long time, and something shifted in his expression. Not peace exactly, but the faint outline of it. "If I asked you to walk away now, would you?" "No," I said simply, "because you'd only follow." For a while, neither of us spoke. The room was filled with the faint hiss of oxygen and the whisper of rain returning against the window. And in that quiet, I thought about everything that had brought us here. The lies, the fear, the moments of tenderness carved from violence, the unspoken truths we both carried like scars. Love, I realized, wasn't about purity or perfection. It was about survival. About seeing the darkness in someone and choosing again and again to reach for the light anyway. He stayed in the hospital for 2 more weeks. Each day he grew stronger, though the lines in his face deepened, carved by something heavier than pain. Memory, perhaps, or the cost of finally facing it. The men who had betrayed him vanished into the wind, the council scattered like ash. But power leaves ghosts, and I knew they would return eventually. They always did. When he was finally discharged, he didn't go back to the villa. He sold it, quietly, without ceremony, and moved us to a smaller house by the coast. The air there smelled of salt and iron, and for the first time, the horizon didn't feel like a threat. Livia laughed more. She spent hours on the sand, her feet buried in the tide, her hands signing to the waves as if they could answer. Sometimes Alessio joined her, sitting at a distance, watching the sea with the stillness of a man learning how to breathe in a world that no longer required him to kill. He didn't talk much about the past anymore. When he did, it wasn't with guilt or pride, but with the quiet acknowledgement of a man who finally understood that silence could heal as much as it could wound. One evening, months later, we sat together on the porch. The sun was bleeding out over the water, turning everything gold and bruised. He turned to me, his voice low. You should have left me that night, when you saw what I'd done. I looked at him, the man who had been both sinner and savior, broken and still unyielding. Maybe, I said. But then who would have taught you how to listen? He smiled, that rare, fleeting smile that softened everything. You're the only one who ever did. And in that moment, I understood that forgiveness wasn't about absolution. It was about staying. About seeing someone's ruin and still choosing to speak to it in a language only the heart could hear. The wind rose, carrying the scent of salt and rain. Livia's laughter echoed across the shore, bright and wordless, and Alessio turned toward the sound, his eyes closing as if memorizing it. He reached for my hand. His palm was warm, rough, real. Do you hear that? He asked. I nodded. Yes. It's beautiful. It's the sound of forgiveness, I whispered. And as the light faded over the water, I realized that maybe, after all the silence, after all the storms, that sound, fragile, fleeting, human, was the only thing powerful enough to make peace with everything we had been.